Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to 2021's first Business Health Workshop. My name is Mark Lawson and I'm Managing Director of an accountancy firm called Business Vision. We specialise in helping small businesses grow their profits and cash flow, but we also do all the normal accountancy stuff as well. So welcome today. This was supposed to be the first of a monthly programme that started in February, but time seems to have run away with us. So there will be one monthly from now on, and hopefully they'll all be about areas to help you grow your business. So I hope you're all well and hope businesses are doing as well as can be expected. But the aim of these sessions is to start growing the business and helping you get through the next year. If you've already been doing well, it will help you get further on. If not, then it basically will help you get beyond that. So the main aim today is for you to take notes and get some practical ideas about what to do, but it's more important that you get some ideas on how to take action. So things to do, we'll give you lots of practical tips on things you can do, but I say, if you listen, take notes, then your business will be none the better. You have to take action as a consequence, so change things within your business. So I'm having a slight issue with the clicker at the moment, so if there's a slight delay as the slides go forward, apologies for that. So what is the most effective way to increase profits, the subject of today's session? And the answer is it's having a price strategy. So that's basically some methods within your business to deal with how you price and how everybody in your organisation knows that you price. And in my experience, that's very, very rare, especially in small businesses. It's quite rare in large businesses as well. So what will usually be the case with pricing strategies is the aim will be to increase prices, and we'll go through lots of ideas on how we might do that. And it won't just be the normal blunt instrument of adding a percentage. So when we talk about increasing prices, the business perception is that we just add 3% or 5% or whatever, and then people react against that. But there are hundreds of ways of increasing prices, and we'll probably go through about 6 to 10 of those today, but only a few of those are very blunt price increases. So we'll certainly touch on that, but hopefully you'll get the flavour that there are a lot more things that can be done beyond that. And also we'll be touching on a little bit of some pricing psychology. Again, there are hundreds of ideas for pricing psychology. There's been huge amounts of research, as you can imagine, in that area. And the reason for including psychology areas is that a large part of pricing is actually emotionally based, whereas a large number of businesses consider it to be logical. So they'll approach it very logically and they'll ignore the emotional aspects. And that's more true on B2C businesses, so business to consumers, but it's still true of B2B, business to business type businesses as well. So there'll be a few areas on that we'll touch on. Okay, so the agenda today, first thing we're going to look at is why pricing. So we've basically launched it by saying it's the most effective way to increase prices. So I will go through and state why we believe that to be the case. We'll then look at some common pricing myths, partly because there will be some negative reaction to some of the things we'll go through if we don't deal with the myths first. And we obviously don't want that. We want you to buy into it and start doing some things within the business. So we'll try and pre-gauge some of the negative thoughts you might have about pricing, and we'll do that before we go into 6 power pricing strategies. And then we'll look at the end of it at what your next steps could be and some ways that we might be able to support you with that. And roughly 1 hour in, we'll do some questions and answers if you have any. Typically, I don't tend to read parrot fashion from a script, so timings might be slightly over, slightly under, usually slightly over. So there may be less than 15 minutes available for questions at the end, but we'll hopefully get to some of them. If not, put them in the chat box and I will come back to you personally afterwards with answers. So the reality is that when we're talking about pricing, the normal reaction is, no, that won't work, or we've tried that and it didn't work out. Our customers are price sensitive and things like that. And we'll deal with those, but it's more about getting outside the comfort zone of pricing. So I think most people generally don't want to be increasing prices and having a conversation with customers and clients because that's not how they feel comfortable dealing with customers. They want to be liked and they want everybody to say how brilliant you are. Well, we'll hopefully find some ways that they can do that and still have prices going up. Okay, so why pricing? Well, the main reason is that it's the best way to increase profits with a small change. So if you look at 1% improvement in any area of a business, and if you're a client of ours, you'll have probably gone through this exercise each year with us. But if you look at, let's say, a small change of 1% in any area that you can make more profit, so you could look at 1% cutting overheads, 1% cutting production costs, 1% more efficiency, 1% more customers, any of those things, and you could list out 10 or 20 ways, I can guarantee that the most effective, i.e. the most money for the 1% change, will be in increasing prices. And we'll go through in a minute and just illustrate why that's the case, because not everybody's aware of the way that the numbers work. The other reason why pricing is that many areas of running a business owners are doing. So they may not be doing it perfectly, but they're doing it. And for that reason, obviously they've got to be able to do that better, and therefore the number of ideas for that will be limited, and the scope will be slightly limited as well. So pricing is usually very rarely looked at, so it makes sense to do something in an area where you're doing nothing at the moment. And if it is looked at, it's certainly under strategized, so people aren't doing as much as they can with pricing, even if they are thinking about it on a yearly basis. It may be that the only conversation they're having yearly is, can we put prices up? If not, why not? Other reasons are that it's a very quick way to change your profits and your success. So these are things that basically, if you did something today, you will be able to see an effect on your profit and loss tomorrow, and cash flow not soon after that, depends on how quickly you get paid. But they are immediate. Whereas if we look at something like getting more customers, that's going to require a fair bit of effort on sales and marketing. So it's going to need more marketing stuff produced. It's going to need that sent out. It's going to take time for customers to react to it. It's then going to get time spent by the business in converting those inquiries. That all takes a lot of effort, which I think pricing doesn't necessarily need, but also it will take a lot longer to kick in. And I say very little work involved in pricing, to be honest. So that's the rough agenda. As I say, it's an hour of going through some practical bits and then hopefully 15 minutes Q&A at the end. If I do overrun and you've got other places to go, then please feel free to finish at that stage. We will be recording and it will be on YouTube, our YouTube site, within probably 2 or 3 weeks. Okay, so I said I'd go through why pricing, just to illustrate why I think it's the most effective way to increase profit. So I've put some key numbers there for an example business. And that example business has £400,000 worth of sales. It has some costs of sales, so labour and materials to produce those sales. So they're directly related to getting the sales achieved. That's 250,000. And then the difference between those two is your gross profit, your margin, £150,000. They've got other overheads of £80,000, which gives them a net profit of 70. So you could look at the profit loss account and go, yeah, that doesn't look too bad at all, which it might not. But one of the other things to bear in mind, which we've included, and you won't see it mentioned in your financial accounts, and it's certainly something that the business owner should be asking, is what is the labour value that the owners have brought to the business that isn't necessarily reflected in the profit and loss that your accountants produce. And what I mean by that is in companies particularly, it's not common to have salaries above £8,000 or £9,000 per director, and that's for tax purposes. In sole traders, you don't actually show anything to do with the owners in the profit and loss account because it's all treated as private money being drawn out. So when you look at your profit, it's after a small or nil owner's value, whereas really the owner's value will be considerably higher. So we say work out what that value is, and at least in your mind, work out whether you're making a real profit. So we might have in this example business case, a business owner who works 60, 70 hours a week and has 1 week holiday a year. Well, to me, that's basically the same as 2 jobs, because in a job, they would have 6 weeks holiday and they would actually only have to work 30, 35 hours a week. And that's a director probably, so their value should be higher because they're doing top end work, or they should be. So in this case, we've valued that at an extra £60,000 of cost that isn't really shown in the business, and that makes the real profit £10,000, which is fine. It means there's some spare, and therefore running a business is worth it. If the business was only making 40,000 profit and the business owner could get £60,000 doing something somewhere else, then it wouldn't make much sense in the long run. So that's basically how a business might look at the moment. You obviously will have your own figures that you can go through. And we're just going to assume, to make the maths easy for me, an example of where that business puts its prices up by 10%. As I say, a very blunt instrument. We just want to illustrate what effect that can have. And what happens in the profit and loss account is basically the only figure that changes is the sales figure, because you've added 10% to that figure. So the sales is now 440. It doesn't cost any more money to produce those sales because nobody else has put their price up 10%. And the overhead stay the same for the same reason. And the business owner's worth stays the same for the same reason. So effectively, that £40,000 increase in price, an increase in sales, is just pure extra profit. It drops right to the bottom line. And that basically means in this example that the net profit has gone up by some 60% just with a 10% price increase. And if you look at the real profit, it's gone up by about 500%. So a small change at the top, if it's to do with pricing, would produce a substantial change at the bottom. And that's why we recommend pricing as a starting point for growing profit. If you basically said, well, we're going to lose some customers with price increases, that may be true. We'll show you some ways to avoid that to a large extent, but it may be true. But the reality is, with that example business, they could lose 27%. So that's more than 1 in 4 of their customers and still be making more money with the 10% price increase. Similarly, they could discount 10% and they would lose £40,000 off their profit and still be doing the same level of work. So we'll touch on those aspects, but hopefully that gives you an idea of why we're talking pricing. Obviously, your figures will be slightly different, but one thing I can guarantee is that the effect will be similar. It will be the best way to increase profits. That is absolutely mathematically certain, because you're changing the top figure without changing anything else. And there's no other thing where that happens that can do the same. Okay, so let's just look at some pricing myths. This may be in your head, it may be in your business owner's head, but they're things that generally we need to get rid of so that you can move forward and work out what you're going to do with pricing to grow your business. And the first one is the most common one, which is we need to price cheap to be competitive. We can't basically get customers or clients without being cheaper than the alternative. And I will show you ways where you can get around that problem, because the reality is, if the only thing that's affecting a person coming to you to buy products or services, then the reality is I think there will always be somebody cheaper. So there must be some alternatives. And I think in many cases, without being too blunt about it, it's a bit of a cop-out, because it basically means you don't have to think about it. You just go, well, price has to be cheap. So that's the pricing strategy done. Let's now work out how cheap we need to be and how we're going to market that. And the reality is, if you look around, there is no great illustration of cheap businesses being successful. I've got many businesses I've worked with where cheap is the opposite. They're running around like headless chickens, working 70-hour weeks and still not making sufficient money. So quick little bit of work your end. Hopefully you might have a pen and paper handy to take notes. Just want to write down 5 things, if you could, in a list. First one is car. Second one is telephone. Third one is hairdresser. And fourth one is coffee. And the fifth one is car wash and polish. And what I want you to do, don't have to think about this too deeply, but I just want you to write next to it what is the price that you will have paid recently for that. Obviously, I suspect with hairdresser, there might be some people that might pay a wee bit more at the moment if they've gone like myself 14 weeks without a haircut. But ignore that. Just normally before COVID, what would you typically pay for that before you'd start to question whether you would actually make a purchase? Just give you a minute to do that. Okay, what I then want you to think about is basically whether the figure you've put down as the price you'd normally pay is the cheapest possible price you could pay anywhere to get that particular item. So are you paying the cheapest price for a car, which I would imagine to get a car that's MOT'd, you're talking a few hundred quid. Phone, probably you can get a second-hand phone out of contract for 20 quid. Hairdresser, difficult to say, but say probably if you went to a gents hairdresser, you could probably find somebody who would do it for a tenner. You could find somebody who works an apprentice in a hairdresser salon that might do it on the side for around that figure as well. Coffee, so tin of coffee, probably you can get own brands for about £1, maybe £2. And car wash and polish, probably you can get that for a few quid. So the point I'm making is that you generally aren't buying everything that you buy based on the cheapest price. So it doesn't make any sense to think that that's how all your customers are thinking, because they're not. And if they were, nobody would be buying from you because you're probably not the cheapest business in town. So don't need to be pricing cheap to be competitive. And if you do, I can guarantee that the chances are your business won't succeed. And even if you can find cases where cheap is the way that they've been successful, so Walmart in America would be a good example, they're struggling, pound shops are struggling. And the only real way that being cheap works is if you have huge market share. So if you can basically get a huge number of people, let's say 1 in 3 people buying from you in the country, then you have a chance. But even then, you have to be able to buy in what you're doing cheap, and you have to be buying it in cheaper than anybody else and selling it cheaper than anybody else, because there's no point being the second cheapest business doing what you're doing. If you're the second cheapest, it means you're not making any money and somebody's still beating you on price. So hopefully that just explains why I don't think being cheap is the best example. I'll give you a few examples. We've got 2 coffees there. One of them's Asda, which when I looked online, you can probably get that for about £2. The one on the right is actually probably slightly less in quantity, but that actually costs £59.99. And that coffee is called Kopi Luwak, which is available, I think it's in India and places like that. And it's very, very specialized coffee, and it's considered the most expensive coffee in the world. You can look it up online and see why, but there are people buying that. And they wouldn't be buying the cheapest, otherwise they'd be going to Asda and getting Nescafe. I always like quoting examples of people who do stuff where they are the most expensive and looking at their case studies, because they are usually very, very successful businesses. Another example is you've given us a figure for car wash. In a local car wash, you can get it for about £1.99. I'm guessing if you go for the lowest price menu, But the one on the right I've illustrated there is because that is the other extreme. You might want to think in your head about what's the most anybody would pay for an ultimate car wash and shine. Well, that guy there is Paul Wilkins. I think he's based in Scotland, and he runs the Ultimate Shine car wash business. And a customer will pay him £100,000 a go for effectively a complete valet. And you can look online why. He effectively works with ultra rich people where they've got effectively model cars stuck in a garage that they don't tend to drive, and they want them to look better than showroom. And he will spend about 3 weeks a go doing that and making everything perfect. And people buy that. And you can imagine that, you know, if you're basically doing a car wash at £1.99, you need quite a large number of cars to visit each day. Paul Wilkins probably only needs a few dozen a year. Another company to look up, I haven't got any illustrations of it, is there's a company, I don't know if they're still going, but they were called 3 Day Kitchen Company, and they're based in America. And their selling point was they can come in and basically fit a complete luxurious kitchen in 3 days, which for most people is actually a huge winner, because the worst thing about having a kitchen fitted is effectively you can't get into it for about 3 or 4 weeks. And therefore, you're having to live from somewhere else and getting takeaways and so on. And they charge way more than the average industry, and yet they were actually spending less time doing it. So they were quids in as well. Okay, second one there. Here's some comments we get when we say put prices up, is they go, you don't understand my business, everybody's going to leave, all my customers are price sensitive. If I put it up 1 penny, they're all going to go. Well, the reality is that some might, but we've already illustrated that if you put prices up and some leave, that's actually not necessarily going to leave you worse off. In most cases, it will still leave you far better off, but with less work to do. And the reality is most of you will have put your prices up in the past by some degree, and you didn't lose all your clients when you did it then. And at some point in the future, you're going to have to put them up. So you might as well consider how now rather than keep waiting and waiting. So all your customers won't leave. The ones that do will probably be the pains in the butts, the ones that basically moan a lot. They ask you to do extra work and they never pay you on time. So losing some of those won't be a bad thing. But the reality is you can lose clients, and to some extent that's part of the point of putting prices up. The third one is some people go, it doesn't apply to my business or industry. I can guarantee that most of these things do. So I'd be surprised out of the 5 to 10 things that we talk about, you won't get at least 4 to 8 of them that definitely apply. If you feel that they don't, then we can have a conversation about how, because the issue might just be working out how it can apply. But I can guarantee that all the ideas I've picked will apply to pretty much every business. And we know that because we've worked with them and made them happen. Next one is cost plus is best. So this is a pricing myth where businesses price what they do based on how much it costs them to do it. And I won't go into great detail, but I could go on about why this is such a bad idea for a long period of time. But the main point I'd make there is customers, clients have no interest whatsoever in how much it costs you to do what you do. What they're interested in is what they get out of it, and that's something that's called value. And it doesn't matter what it costs you to create that. That isn't anything to do with the buying decision. It's a decision that affects the business, but it's certainly not an external thing that the customer's worried about. There are other reasons why it doesn't make any sense, because if you take, let's say, a solicitor or an accountant who charges by the hour, which many of them aren't doing now, we have never done that. The problem there is that if they take twice as long, for example, doing your accounts, then the fee is going to be double, and yet it's going to be slower. So that doesn't make any sense at all. They're doing it worse and charging you more because the labour time was higher. Doesn't make any sense. Similarly, if you do basically add stuff onto your cost, one of the decisions you have to make in most businesses is how much of the overheads do you add in, because your overheads are going to be fixed, most of them. So you need to cover those, but how much of those overheads do you add to each customer? Because you don't know how many customers you're going to have. You don't know what your sales figure is going to be. So those are just 2 or 3 reasons. But if you're doing pricing estimates or working out your price for a menu based on what it cost you, then I would seriously have another look at that and seek our help in working out an alternative method. Another example of why that won't work is, let's say you're in a business where you charge out for labour and you manage to find a computer program that costs a huge amount of money, but it allows you to do it twice as quick. Does that then mean that you actually halve your prices? How would you then cover the cost of the machine? And it doesn't make any sense from a customer's point of view. They don't care that you've got a large piece of software to help you do it quicker. They just care that it's quicker. In many cases, being quicker means they'll pay more. So there's that. And then the last one is sort of the one that, if all else fails, business owners tend to throw around, which is, I'll be ripping customers off. It's not morally right. And I would just say that if you go into business, it's to sell. You want people to buy your stuff. So if you're going to start having issues about the price that they buy, I don't think that's a serious argument, because the customer ultimately decides whether the price is right or not you. So putting a price on it is going to get a yay or nay from the customer, and that's the only issue. I'd also point out that in the UK, about 29% of people spend more than their income. 29% of businesses spend more than their profit, which basically means that if you keep your prices low to save them some money, they're just going to spend it somewhere else anyway. So you're not actually doing them any big favors. And ultimately, if you're very cheap in your business, it means you can't afford to get the best people, the best products, and you may not even be in business to help them at all in a few years. So I think if that's one of the arguments, again, I can help talk you out of that, but it doesn't seem to me to be a serious one. Okay, so that's the myths out of the way. So we need to just move on to some power strategies. And the first one is basically just looking at increasing. So we said that just increasing prices is a bit of a blunt instrument, but it's also quite quick and easy to do. So we're going to touch on that and go through a few ways that you might want to consider how you would approach that. I would certainly say that if you don't already, then prices, if you work on a set price list or method of pricing or a menu price or an online price, those need to go up by about 3% a year as standard before you do anything else, because otherwise you're just not covering inflation. Over the last 20, 30 years, inflation has averaged 3%, and that's going to continue. It will be less on some years, more in others. But you need a standard increase of 3%. Otherwise, you'll be walking backwards. That's covering increasing minimum wage. It's increasing your suppliers who will be putting prices up. It will be covering the tax that's obviously going to go up as well. So 3% minimum a year. The other thing with basic price increases beyond the 3%, so let's say you suddenly feel confident and you want to do 10%, I wouldn't bet the business on that strategy, because even though I know that most businesses aren't charging enough, and we know that because we've done surveys, other people have done research, on average, most people would be willing to pay more than the business they bought from would sell for. And that makes sense if you think about it, because if they weren't prepared to pay what you're charging, they wouldn't give you a sale. So the chances of their price limit being exactly what you're charging is pretty remote. It's likely to be more. So they would be prepared to pay more, but I can't tell you, without doing a lot of research that probably wouldn't be cost effective, I can't tell you whether a 5% price increase will lose you 10% of your clients, 20, 30, 40. You won't know either. And unfortunately, the only way to really find out in a small business is to do it and see what happens. But I would say, if you're going to do it, don't bet the business. So don't do it as a big figure off for everybody, because if it isn't right, then you're never going to get that business back, and the business could well fail. I say we don't know where the sticking point is as to exactly how much you can do before it becomes non-effective. So what I would do there is do it gradually and bit by bit. So what you might do is maybe look at your worst clients and try it on them, because if they go, you're probably not going to be that fussed anyway. Research shows that 20% of your customers make 80% of your profit, which means 80% of your customers make 20% of your profit. And it's those bottom ones that if we lose, they're probably actually going to make you more money anyway, because the amount of time you spend. So maybe look at just some of your clients and see what happens. Maybe you could look at a section of your client base. You could look at maybe some postcodes, or how long they've been with you, and do it with the oldest customers first. You could look at a particular service or product and just test it on that one and see what happens. Or you could do it gradually. You could just do it once for 2%, and then a couple of months later do another 2%. So you could get up to 10% a year by doing it 5 times. But in every single case, it's important that you measure very accurately what the impact is, because I can guarantee if you don't, the knee-jerk reaction will be that somebody says you're too expensive, I can't do business with you, and then you will think the whole strategy is wrong. Whereas you will lose customers, and you can lose customers and still make more money. That's almost inevitably the way it will go, but there's no point doing it on the whole business just in case. So do it bit by bit, measure the results, and then you'll be able to get the confidence. Maybe you might need some help on working out what those numbers are telling you, but you'll get the confidence that actually, even though you've got slightly less customers, you're making more money. So if you want to just increase prices, I say don't bet the business on it. Do it in small steps. And I would look at that as your first option, because most businesses are underpricing. So whenever we've done this exercise, as long as it's done carefully, we've never had a single business that has actually lost more clients or customers or sales than would get them below the profit they were making before. And the reality is you're also gaining time, because you no longer have to service as many customers or clients to get that profit as well. Okay, so that's number one. Next one is to add more value. So we'll look at in a moment at the value equation. Value is really what people are after. They're not after cheap. Cheap is actually a figure that's invented by business owners. Clients want value. So it's important to work out what the definition of that is. So a value equation basically says that the perceived value, that is where you're going to get a sale. So the perception of what the client feels is enough, is going to be a function of tangible benefits plus intangible benefits. So it's what do they get? It's basically what they get after you've finished doing whatever you do. And that's tangible, i.e. it's the real bits, the bits you concentrate on, but it's also very much the intangible, the emotional side, especially on B2C. And there's a lot more scope with the intangible benefits, because that's not an area businesses tend to concentrate on. And we'll go through some examples of that in a moment. But it's the old story about people don't want to just buy a drill, they're buying a hole. So people are buying stuff to achieve an end, and it's fatal to just concentrate on the means of producing the end. You need to concentrate on the end as well. And obviously there is a deduction to come off that, which is the price. So where the bit on the top exceeds the price, and you'll notice that I've put in all of those functions perceived, because it's not about the actual logical of it, it's about the perception. And we'll come on to why we're talking about perception. So you've got two options there. If you want to basically get more sales, you either need to increase the bit at the top, the value, or you need to reduce the bit at the bottom, which is the price. And you can do both. When we're talking about reducing price, we're more talking about perception rather than the logical figure. So based on what we said earlier about reducing prices, we're not necessarily talking about reducing something that was 100 quid to 90. We're talking about reducing the price's perception. So let's look at a few ideas there. And this is just a quote from Mark Wickersham, who's a pricing expert we worked with many, many times. And he says, remember, the secret to getting the right price, a price that truly reflects the value, is to educate the customer. So what you need to do is not just have value, and we'll look at some ideas on how you would go beyond what you're doing already, but you need to explain it. There's a great example of Schlitz Brewery, which is an American beer, and they were about number 6, I think, many, many years ago, and they hired an expert consultant to try and get them further up the ladder in terms of the best-selling beer. And he basically started off by getting them to show him around, and they were based on the lakes, Great Lakes of America. So he had a show round, and they showed him how they drill right down into the lakes to get the purest water, how they then bring that up and make the beer with it, and some really clever processes. And he was looking at this and going, that's just fantastic. He says, what you need to do is you just need to tell people. And they said, but you don't understand, in our business, everybody does this. And he said, yes, but the others aren't telling their customers about it. And so Schlitz started making that part of their marketing, and they went up to number 2 fairly quickly. And that's about stuff that everybody was doing, just nobody knew it. So have a think about that. Also have a look at, on Google, maybe what you consider to be 5 competitors to your business, and just look at their websites and see if they're presenting any value beyond the bog standard basic stuff. You know, so if it's an accountant's website, are they just saying, yeah, we do accounts, we do tax returns? Because that's what all of them will be saying. Very difficult to actually gauge value on that, and therefore very difficult to compete. But the reality is you don't need to be unique. Schlitz beer wasn't unique, it just marketed it better. So you're going to have a pricing conversation with your client. Question is, when will it take place? It can basically take place after you've sold, in which case you're probably talking about a price complaint or a negative sale, or you discuss that in some way, shape or form before the sale takes place. So if you're online, you need to basically sell the value before they start going through the price list. If you're doing a quote and sending that out or presenting it in person, you need to explain the value before you get to the price. So make sure that the pricing conversation takes place after you've had the value conversation, so they understand what they're getting. So as I say, we can increase value, and we talked about some ways of doing that, but it doesn't necessarily cost you. What we're talking about with increasing value is basically things that don't necessarily cost any money. So it could be things that you're already doing, like Schlitz beer. They didn't have to do anything different, they just had to tell people. It could be that you can basically do something different in terms of timing. So the value you can bring could be in terms of the timing of it. So if you're, let's say a plumber, turning up on time can be great value to a lot of businesses, and yet so many of them just don't do that. Wouldn't take a lot of cost to do that. It would just take a little bit of effort and attention to detail. You could also bring in the emotional value side, where you start to reclassify stuff as, some of your clients could be VIPs. Business class is a great example of that. People pay more for business class because they're offered it. It could be something that it elevates their status in society. So it's all about how will they feel when you've left and done what you're going to do. You can also increase the perception of value by adding testimonials and case studies, and a lot of websites we analyze don't have that in any shape or form, or if they do, it's very, very little, it's tucked away. So there are great ways of elevating the perception of value, is somebody else is telling them how great they are, how great you are, sorry. So that can be an immediate uplift in the perception of value. And as I've mentioned, we're talking about perceptions, not just the harsh realities. This is all about how people think, and it's how they perceive stuff. So I'll just give you an example. I've called it 32-point service standard. And this will be something, let's say we're a roofer, and it's not going to be 32 points. That's just a way of illustrating what it could be. And that's effectively something that would be presented either before the quote or at the same time of the quote, and or discussed when the initial conversation takes place with the potential client. And that would basically say something like, we're not your bog standard roofers. We basically don't charge the lowest in the country. And the reason for that is we want to do things perfectly. So we have a 30-point standard checklist of things that we do. Can I just run through that with you now? And they would go through a list, and it would say perhaps these sort of things. We turn up on time, when we say we're going to turn up within 5 minutes, or we give you £100 off. We give you a fixed price, and we guarantee that that will be the price at the end, unless we find some of these things which might then require us to give you a further quote, but we will only charge that if you agree to it and sign up. So you'll never pay a penny more than we've told you and you've agreed. Our roofers, when they turn up, won't swear. Our roofers, when they turn up, will turn up in proper overalls in a company van with ID. So you know exactly who you're dealing with. They're not subcontractors, they are our staff. There'll be no loud radios played. They'll basically video the problems on your roof before it's done, and they will then basically video it after it's done. They will either take you up on the ladder, or if you're not comfortable with that, they will show you the video of what's been done and check that you're completely happy with it. We won't wear shoes indoors. We'll wear little stuffs over our shoes to stop any mess in the house. We will do a complete clean-up after we've finished, and we will show you around every area we've worked in and make sure that's clean to your level of satisfaction, not ours. And if it's not, we'll keep cleaning it until it is. Only when we've got you to sign off on all these areas will we then send you a bill. We'll then basically come round and revisit you after 6 months to check that everything we've done is still working properly, and if it's not, we'll fix it free of charge. We'll give you a referral fee for recommending any neighbours, and we'll give them a discount as a gift from you. Obviously, what that does is get the business new customers. We'll also keep you informed in advance of anybody else, news of new products on the markets and new better ways to actually keep your roof in good condition. We'll also get somebody to come round and clean your gutters. And what will happen there is the roofing company will have a friendly cleaner, a window cleaner, who will come round and do that once for free. But obviously then it's up to the window cleaner to then try and get more regular sales on the back of it. So they will be able to get another company to do the cleaning of the guttering completely free. They'll complete a complete health check of the roof. And basically, if there's anything else that we notice while we're up there, we'll give you a complete detail of what that is. So you can either come back to us if we can fix it, or go to the relevant person if it needs somebody else and get that sorted. So we'll do that MOT of your roof while we're up there, because you probably don't go up there at all to look at it, and we might find things like, you know, the flashing around the chimney pot or whatever that might need to be looked at. So if a roofer came to you, if you had a slight problem with your roof and presented the value of what they do like that, I can guarantee that you're more likely to get a sale from that customer, and because of that, you're also going to be able to increase your prices. None of those things particularly take any major time or effort. They're very low cost or no cost, and some of the stuff is just passed on to another business who can basically do the work for free, because it's effectively a marketing exercise. There was a great company, I can't remember what they did, but they basically took the southeast of England by storm because they did some work on the house, and they then also said, we'll get your garden completely done and made, you know, look like a proper show garden twice free of charge, and that was part of the deal. And all they did is they got a very good landscape gardening company to go out and do that, and then obviously the landscape gardening company did it twice, and the customers usually wanted them to come back and do it on a regular basis. So it was a lost leader, but that didn't cost the actual business any money at all. They could even have probably charged a commission for getting them in the door. So there are some things you can do to increase value, and it's something to have a big think about. We also want to look at, we said we could make the price smaller, but we're looking at the perception of making the price smaller. So there's a few little ideas here, and we're just giving you a few examples to think about. So which of those two things seems the smaller figure, £1,008 or £84 per month for 12 months? And the key there is you don't have to give your headline price away. Many businesses quote monthly if it's relevant. So accountants could, software companies can. Whether it's paid monthly is not necessarily the case. It just makes it look smaller. Anybody can work out that 12 times 84 is the same figure, but that won't happen because psychologically they're already thinking it's a lower figure. So that's perception. Similar thing, power of 9, you've probably come across, ending a figure in 9 works better. This is a survey that was done in a clothing, this is when they used to do direct mail, so you used to get a little catalogue through the door, and this was one item where they basically put different prices in different areas of catalogues to see which worked best. And they tried 3 different figures, 34, this was in America, so it's $34, $39 and $44. And what they found was basically less people paid the $44 than the $39, which obviously you'd expect, but a lot more paid $39 than $34. And that's for the same item, you know, and that's because there is studies that show having a 9 at the end works psychologically. People don't need to be a rocket scientist to work out which of those 3 prices is cheaper, but the reality is the 9 makes a big difference. Doesn't need to be careful with this because that's not always the case. 9 doesn't tend to work quite so well with big ticket prices. So if you were selling a house for £299,999, that would probably put people off. And there are loads of other number things to do with pricing that we know about. I'm not going to go through them all today, but that's one that you could look at. So basically, if you're going to price something at 40, you might as well go 39 or 45, because 40 is probably not going to do you any favors. Similarly, you also want your prices to seem logical. So as I said, 299,999 doesn't sound logical. Also, figure like £2,155 doesn't sound as logical as 2,497. So there are certain numbers that just psychologically feel more real, and that needs testing as well. Sorry, I didn't have the numbers in there, but that's 16 sold at $34, 21 sold at $39. So five more people bought at $39 than when it was advertised at $34. Another example there is you could quote a £5 fee, or you could quote a small £5 fee. Reality is that people will see that second one as being lower. Makes no logical sense, and most of these things won't, but there has been research on this, and that's why we quote it. And that research shows that amongst people who are price sensitive, the second one got 20% more yeses than the top one, even though it's the same price. This has also been researched, so how you show a figure makes a difference. And I've quoted on there where the research came from, but the top one scored less well than the next 2, and the last one scored best. So putting a comma in a figure that's over 3 digits doesn't work as well. And also putting the pence when it's a round figure doesn't work as well. And it's simply because it looks bigger on paper. You know, it looks bigger on a website, and that psychologically makes a big difference. I know some of this, when we talk about psychology, will sound weird, and I'll come to some even weirder ones in a minute, but these are all researched. And if you look through any pricing book or manual that's worth its salt, they will all be mentioning these as ways forward. Okay, so that's just about adding value and making the perception of the price lower. So the next one is probably the most effective, but I'll warn you now that this one is basically probably going to take a bit more time to think through, but it works, and we know it works because pretty much every big business does some form of it. And it basically says that every person is willing to pay a different price. So everybody's different. So, you know, what you might pay for something is different from the next person. What you've all put down as what you pay for a haircut at the beginning of the session will all be different. So the reality is, if you've got a one price, so if at the top, I've used the word quote, but we're talking about an online price or a menu price. If you're quoting one figure, then your customers have only 2 decisions to make. Is it a yes or is it a no? And that's what we call a binary decision. If they say no, you've got no comeback. So you're basically going, it's a 50-50 choice. You decide yes or you decide no. What we're talking about with different prices is to give them options. So that's what we've shown at the bottom. It doesn't have to be gold, silver, bronze, but that's just a generic way of explaining it. is if you had 3 levels for that particular service or product with slight variations, then with the gold level, the top price, you've got a decision, yes or no. But if the answer is no, then they can still make a decision about the silver price, yes or no. If the answer to that is no, they've got a decision to make about the bronze price, yes or no. And only then, if all 3 aren't fitting in, will they actually not be a customer. So your conversion rates and your buying is going to be far greater with that sort of decision. And that's one of the big benefits, is you'll get more customers saying yes. But there also are some other benefits, because if you price those levels correctly, you will find people who are prepared to pay a lot more than the single price. Let's say you were selling something for 100 quid. People who don't like 100 quid won't buy. People who are actually prepared to pay more than 100 quid will. But some of those people who buy might have been prepared to pay 150, but they're not going to tell you that. They're not going to say, you're cheap, you're charging me 100 quid, but actually I would have paid 150 for that. The way to find out is to give them some options where the top level has a few extra bits and bobs in it, and they just go, yeah, nothing but the best for me, and they'll pay it. And that does need a bit of thinking through, partly about what you put in the offerings, and there needs to be at least 3. You can't have 2, because people will just go for the bottom one. If you have 3, they'll tend to go for the middle one, but some will go for the top. And the ones that wouldn't have bought will still potentially go for the bottom one. And that works in businesses all the time. You can see it in supermarkets. So with coffee, for example, there will be more than one coffee in a supermarket. There will be own brand, which will be the cheapest, so people who haven't got much money. There'll be basically a middle brand, which will be normal price, decent coffee, and then there'll be a top luxury brand where people who actually buy luxury will buy that, and they'll sell all 3. Most people will go for the middle, but some people will buy the lower one where they wouldn't normally have bought anything if it wasn't there. Centre Parks is a great example. Don't know if you've ever been to Centre Parks, probably not in the last 12 months, obviously, but they have basically villas in a secluded wood area with effectively luxury butlins is what it is, luxury villas, luxury pools, etc. And what they do is every single villa, they normally have about 300 or 400, every single villa, every single week is a different price. And those prices change online depending on the circumstances. So if you want it in half term, a lot more. If you want the luxury villa that's got, huge Wi-Fi and a games room and a snooker table, a lot more money. And different people will buy those, and they price it so that every single villa is full every single day of the year. And they do that because they can change it on a computer system. But that's a great example of how options works. Cinemas is another example. If you go to cinemas, you will see now that you'll have the option of obviously times of the day. So there may be cheaper seats particular days of the week. You'll have VIP seats, which means you get slightly more leg room, a few little bells and whistles, but effectively nothing major, and they'll charge 20% more. And there'll be people sat in those a lot of the time. Airlines do it. They will deliberately keep seats back for business customers because business customers pay more money. And they know roughly how many business customers will come and fill a plane. So you might be a price-sensitive holiday customer, and you might find that the airlines booked up that flight. But actually, you might find that certain business seats are then released nearer the flight time, because most business people will make a decision nearer the flight time, urgent business meeting, and they don't care about price so much because it's their business, big multi-industry that's paying for it, not them. So look around and see what's happening. That's happening all over the place. We gave you an example at the beginning of a car wash. That's a great example of options. There is a £1.99 car wash if you want it, but there's also a £9 one. And partly people will pay for the £9 one, even though they don't understand all the things that's actually being done. So it will mention some under sealing that goes on underneath the car at the top level, but most people wouldn't have a clue what that is or whether they need it. They just think, I must have the £9 one, my car deserves it. So options, different prices. And that's based on the fact that everyone has a different price. It's about maximizing how much you can charge each individual customer. As I said before, keep the number of options to at least 3. So you want a top, middle and bottom. And when you quote them or show them, always make sure you show the highest one first, because if they see the high one and make a decision to buy, the other two options become irrelevant. Whereas if they make that decision when they see the cheapest one, you've actually sold the cheapest one first, when they might have been persuaded to buy the more expensive one. So different prices is worth it. And this is just an illustration of how that works. Is you might not be able to see it easily on the screen, but the bigger block is basically average price. So most businesses, as price goes up, sales drop. That's the law of economy. So as that happens, less customers buy. So you typically price somewhere in the middle to get half the people available buying. But what you can get is some people buying at the top price. So rather than just have a P2 price level, you can have a P3 and a P1 price level, which is a price for the cheapskates and a price for the luxury in all that I do type person. And by doing that, you capture more of the market availability, because you're losing every time you sell to somebody, you're losing money. I can guarantee that almost all of them would have been prepared to pay more. It makes logical sense. But you've had no method of getting that extra money off them because they're not going to tell you. And this is just an illustration of how that might work in a quote or online. You've seen this before. It's basically just the 3 levels. This is just an example that's come from online, and it gives you 3 levels, different prices, and it tells you what you get. So that the top level has everything ticked. And then if you're going to go for the middle level, some of those things you don't get. And if you don't need them or you're fairly price sensitive, you probably go for the middle. And then the lowest end, you don't get that much at all. But if you really just want the basic budget model, then you can still buy it. And there's a good chance with those 3 options, anybody vaguely interested in that is going to buy, because there's a level for them to buy in at. If it was just one price, you'd lose a lot of customers. And just another final example is Starbucks, obviously, and most cafes do this. Is there's 3 levels of coffee. You know, what do you want? In Starbucks, it's tall, grande, or venti, and people decide which they want. Most go for the middle, but there'll be some people who want the top and some who go for the bottom because it's priced cheaper. But they have choices. And the aim, effectively, is to move people. If it's a service, you're moving them from basic service to premium plus by bringing in a few things that doesn't cost much money and getting them to pay a lot more. And if it's a product, this is an example of Apple. Obviously, they can have a basic iPod where it just plays music. It does, you know, what you want, but there's a limited capacity of how much music you can put on it. There's no screen, there's no touch screen. Then you start to go up to the middle level where there's a few extra things. There's a touch screen, and then top level where it's basically all apps and all bells and whistles. And obviously, those 3 things effectively do the same thing. So they're ultimately at the basic essence doing the same thing, but they're all doing them in very different ways. And that's what we're looking for in your business. Okay. Price resistance is the next one. So as part of price, we want to look at what we do when we get that awkward conversation where people go, it's a bit expensive. The one we've just mentioned, 3 levels, we'll get around that to some extent. What I would say with price resistance is to welcome it, because if nobody's resisting your prices, I can guarantee you're way too low. And what I would do with price resistance is train your team. If you break it down, and the way to do this would be to record every single objection that you ever get and group it into categories. There's probably only really 6 or 7. So there'll be things like I can't afford it, it's too much, which is not quite the same as the first one. I can get it cheaper elsewhere, it's not right for me, and so on. And you just basically come up with the scripts that your people need to raise to try and overcome those objections. So for example, if they say it's cheaper elsewhere, then they will be trained to highlight the differences that other people won't be able to provide. So you say, yes, but they're basically going to be cheap for a reason, which is they cut corners, so they won't be doing this, that. So if you were the roofer we mentioned earlier, you'd go through and go, yeah, but they probably won't turn up on time because they're so cheap, they're very busy, and they'll be overrunning because they've got poor workmen. So they'll probably ring you up the night before and say they're going to be delaying. We don't do that. You can see that from our guarantee. They won't spend much time checking around your roof and seeing if there's any other things up there. They won't clean up after them. They'll hire subcontractors. So they'll just basically do what subcontractors do, which is run amok. So all of those areas basically look at what you can come up with to not accept that resistance, but to try and overcome it. Won't work in every case, but it will certainly convert quite a few of them. And there really ultimately, if you think about it, are only three reasons. The first one is the customer can't afford it. The second is there is not enough value. So they can afford it, but they just don't think there's enough there to make it worth it. And third one is that the client can't see the value, which is about the perception. Now, the first one is a problem really for the marketing department, because if your people are actually having conversations, or if your website's getting visited by people who just can't afford what you're doing, then the marketing department has a job to do to try and whittle those out, because they're just wasting your time. You don't want every customer in the world. You want those who can afford a decent price. And you need to try and eliminate those with your marketing, with your website. So if you're going to be a premium supplier, there needs to be an element of people looking at it and going, look, this is luxury. This isn't going to be the cheapest in town. And if they want the cheapest in town, then you get rid of them as quickly as you can. Otherwise, you're doing things like quoting, knowing that they're not going to buy, or you have to do a load of selling and they still end up not buying, or worse, that they actually do buy but then can't afford it and don't pay all of it. Second issue, not enough value. That's a sales and marketing thing. We've talked about how you would provide value. So if you're basically more expensive than other people and what you're providing is no better or worse, then you've got a serious problem, because that's nothing to do with price. It's about how you do what you do to justify the price. So you do have to be providing wows, but that doesn't usually involve the core business process. And the third one is clients can't see the value, which again is all explaining about what value there is. And all three of those are the business fault. It's not the customer's fault. If they basically were showed something and then realized later on that it's not in their wallet size, that's because they've seen the advert and they shouldn't have. If they can't see the value, then that's because it hasn't been explained properly. So eliminate those as much as you can. I'm conscious I'm overrunning into Q&A time, so if you have got questions, do write them in the chat box, but I'll just keep going through the next few bits. The fifth idea is called contrast. This is, again, a slightly psychological one. The reality is that people don't normally know how much something should cost. So similarly, it's hard for somebody to tell by lifting it how much a suitcase weighs. So if I gave you a suitcase that weighs 40 kilogram and you lifted it, you wouldn't know it's 40 kilogram. But if I gave you two and said which one's lighter or heavier, you'd know that, almost, spot on accurate. And it's the same with pricing. Most people don't know what the price of something should be without having something to compare it with. So without contrast, everything sounds expensive or cheap. So the idea is for you to give them some contrast that will work in your favor. So I've given you a few ideas there, and I say there are loads more, but just to give you a flavor. So you could basically contrast the cost or the price with the price of not doing it. So if you're selling insurance, there's obviously, it's all about the price of not doing it. So we sell, tax investigation insurance. There is a price to that, but the contrast is, well, what's that going to be compared to having an investigation where your fees aren't covered? That typically would be, in some cases, running into 5 figures. You don't want to be paying that. Yeah, there's not a big chance of getting an investigation, but a 5-figure sum of fees is something you want to do without. The opportunity cost of not doing it. So basically, this is what you won't get. So if you're buying a holiday, it's all about, well, if you don't buy the holiday, you're just going to be doing the same old, you deserve this. Cost of comparable solutions, very important. What other solutions are available and why is yours better? Cost of everyday solutions, cost of doing it yourself. So if you're selling, I don't know, let's say, kitchens or bathroom suites, there's an argument that says, well, you could just buy the equipment off us and give it a go yourself. But these are the things that you probably won't be aware of that we've seen go wrong when people try and do it yourself. So that's, the cost of getting it wrong is your time, and then the cost of doing it properly again. Compare against the biggest value product. So that's comparing it against your gold level. and we'll come on to that in a moment. Contrast with future price, so obviously that's what sales are all about, or pre-launch prices, and we'll give you an example of that with something we're doing in a minute. And also compare with emotions. How will you feel? You'll feel a lot better with this than if you didn't. That might work with charitable donations, for example, all those sort of things. So there's an example there of basically comparing it with everyday items, which is a piece of IT equipment is £2.45 a day compared to 1 cup of coffee a day, £3.45. It means nothing, but it just frames the price in a way where customers feel that it's smaller, because it's contrasting it with something smaller. So loads and loads of things you can do with that. And the last of the 6 areas is what we call anchoring. And this is probably one where you will feel, what's the word? You'll feel it's weird, and there'll be a degree of skepticism. And all I would say is to research it, because this works really, really well, but nobody believes it should. And I'll give you an example of where it is happening, but it is happening in loads of areas. If you go to somewhere like Rodeo Drive in America, and which is a really swanky strip with top level branding shops. Let's say you go into a handbag shop, they will have one in the window. Sorry, not in the window. They'll have a little glass pillar with a glass box with, let's say, a diamond encrusted handbag inside it. It will all be secured, and framed off like a jewelry item. And the price of that will be something like $800,000. And you see that when you walk in. Now, the reality is that's not there to try and sell a handbag for $800,000, because even the people going in will go, geez, that's a bit expensive. But what then happens is, as they go around the rest of the shop and they see handbags for $5,000, that seems really cheap. And that is anchoring. Now, logic says that shouldn't make any difference, and you're right, but it does. So I'll give you another example, or 2 examples actually. There's a redwood tree experiment that they did, and this was in a group of people who all were independent, and they had 2 questions to answer. And the first question was 2 different questions. So question 1 was split into 2 halves. So one half of the group had one question 1, and the other half of the group had a separate question 1. And that question was, for the first half of the people, it said, is a Canadian redwood tree less than 50 foot high? Now, the answer almost, inevitably is going to be no. And the second group had their first question was slightly different. It says, is a Canadian redwood tree more than 2,640 foot high, which is half a mile? And the answer to that, for most logical people, would be no. The second question for everybody was the same, and that said, how tall do you think a Canadian redwood tree is? And what was interesting is that the half that basically had the question about the 30 foot understated the height of a redwood tree substantially less than the other half who were asked about whether it was more than half a mile high. And that's because they had that presented as an anchor, so almost like a heavy suitcase in comparison. So their perception of what the answer should be was based on something that was presented to them at the beginning, and that put something in their mind. And that was significantly, you can look that up online, the difference was significantly lower for the first half and significantly higher for the second. And that was also done in another example with a group of people where the anchor was not even related to what they were doing. So they had a group of students and they had to basically go through, they all had about 10 items of everyday things, and they were asked to put down what they were prepared to pay for it. But before they were asked that question, what those each things they pay for, they had one further question, which is, what is the last 2 numbers of your security number? This was in America again. So they basically just asked, what's the last 2 numbers of your social security number? Write that down. Then how much would you pay for item 1? How much would you pay for item 2? And those who had a higher social security number at the end were willing to pay substantially more than those with a lower number. And now I know you'll be thinking, well, that's just bizarre, and it is. but psychology says that by planting those numbers in their head, they were thinking big number, and that directly influenced what they said they would be prepared to pay. So again, you can look that up. That's a scientific experiment. But even weirder is that when people were told that they'd be giving something to anchor their mind psychologically, when they were told that they'd be giving something to make them think big or small, they still did what the experiment showed. So even when they knew what was being tried to, force them to do, they still did it. They couldn't resist that anchoring. So have a look at anchoring. And one way to do that is to use the right language. So you can use language like luxury, exclusive, things like that. But also one of the big things that will help with anchoring is if you've got gold, silver, bronze, your gold can often be the anchor. Or if you've got gold, silver, bronze, you can have platinum. And that top one becomes your anchor in that you price it so high that if you get it 1 in 100 times, you're going to go, that's just fantastic, let's go out and celebrate. But even if you don't get any, it makes the next 2 levels look far more reasonable in comparison. So consider anchoring in terms of how you present stuff. So for example, if we were trying to anchor the price of investigation insurance, we could go, well, a tax investigation can cost £30,000. If you were selling a house, you could go, here's a picture of a house that cost £1 million. The one we're going to show you is 300,000, but again, it will make the £300,000 look cheaper. If you're selling cars, have people walk past cars that, are selling for 5 times as much as the ones they're looking for. They won't buy them, but their price levels will be psychologically implanted. So have a look at that. It is psychology, and I know some of you will be slightly worried about that, but it is happening all the time in the real marketing world. So a couple of other tips, as I said, I've mentioned using the right language. An illustration there is in a restaurant menu, you could just say this is a pulled pork in a bun, or you could put slow cooked, hand pulled juicy pork meat piled high in a fresh bun, topped with homemade coleslaw and Chef Bob's secret recipe barbecue sauce. The second one's going to have far more impact in terms of value. You'd expect, again, psychologically, to be paying more for the second one, even though it's technically the same as A. Other quick tips is try and use an upgrade nudge, which basically means if you sell something, then consider immediately after you've got the sale whether there's anything smaller that could be added on. And you'll see that online, great marketers online, once you've signed up and put something in the cart and paid for it, an offer will flag up before you leave saying, what about this? This is a special offer before you leave this page. And probably about 1 in 5, 2 in 5 people will then buy that, partly because they're in buying mode. Effectively, their wallet's out. So they're in buying mode. So that's the right time to grab them. But also, it's an offer. So look at things like that. Car salesmen do it when after they've sold you the car, then they'll have the conversation about whether you want to upgrade the hi-fi inside or whether you want to upgrade the seats to leather or whatever. So do the basic selling and then consider whether there's any add-ons, partly because they might want them, partly because they're in buying mode. That's the best time to be doing the selling. Review your quotes, menus and price lists. So be aware that your price lists, your website, your quotes, they're all marketing materials. So think of those things when you're presenting price. That's not a logistical thing. It's not a technical thing. It's a marketing thing. So if you're trying to sell a computer, when you're basically presenting stuff, you need to present it in such a way that you're doing marketing, not technical, unless technical is of use to marketing. So you're still in basically emotional mood in a quote, so include things like testimonials and case studies. Don't just include all your small terms and conditions. They haven't bought yet. You can give them the T's and C's later or in a separate document. But the marketing is done in the pricing. That's a marketing job, and you need to consider it as a marketing job. And also just consider context. Is pricing can be different in different contexts. So if you were, this is in the old days, if you wanted to buy a roll of film for your camera, that would be a lot more expensive in Disneyland than it would be in a corner shop. Because if you're just buying it in Disneyland, it means you've forgotten to buy film for your camera, and there's obviously a special occasion occurring, so the price there will be huge. Similarly, if you're in a water park, you know, they'll be selling, you know, very cheap raincoat max to stop you getting wet at a vastly increased price than if you just bought it in the local store. Okay, we've gone through all of those things quite quickly just to try and get you enough ideas, but I said I'd be quite happy to look through any chat items, or most of you will have my email address, but if not, it's mark, M-A-R-C, at marklawson.co.uk. Any queries or thoughts on that, please let me know. But the key now is about basically taking action. So key ideas, I think, just to get moving with 5 things that you probably ought to be doing. One is, based on the first idea we had, is look at whether you can increase your prices by a basic amount beyond inflation. Look at your price quotes and price lists wherever pricing occurs, whether it's a menu, whether it's online. Have a look at those and just review how they're presented psychologically. See if you can get basically 3 different levels in there. See if you can create more value without too much extra cost or hassle to things, and see if that fits into 3 different price levels, or at least gets you more sales and allows you to put your prices up. And differentiate, as I say, have different levels of things for different types of customers. Gold, silver, bronze is a brilliant way to get more money. Needs thinking through carefully, but we can help with that. And the 5th thing is to get help, and I'll give you some ideas of how we can do that. So the first thing is, for coming to today's session, you can get a free pricing book, it contains loads of stuff. It goes into this in a fair bit more detail, and you can read that at your leisure. So it's called The Business Owner's Guide to Transforming Profits Through Price. So you just simply need to put your email address in the chat or email me after today, and I will get that sent out to you. The other things we can do is we can do a power pricing session, which is about an hour, to go through a specific area that you want to try and move forward with and give you more context about what we're trying to do and how to do it. And that's going to be about an hour, and that's £80 plus VAT. We can get that set up. And for today only, power pricing, a half-day session, which we do for clients that normally cost £400 plus VAT. That we can look at several areas and pricing strategy generally and get really to the bottom of it specifically for your business. Normally 400, but if you sign up for that today, either through the chat or by emailing me before midnight, then anybody who's in this session will get that for £197 plus VAT. If you're actually listening to this on a recording on YouTube, I have to apologise and say that that isn't going to be available to you. So it's only on those that attended on the day, if they sign up on the day. So have a look at those, and at the very least I would think pricing book, but have a think about the others, because I can guarantee that any money spent on pricing at this stage is guaranteed to bring more profits back in, because it's, I say, one of the best ways to make extra profits quickly. So the return on that will be huge and almost immediate. So thanks for attending today, and I've run over slightly. And apologies for that, but it is a big subject, and we've only just touched the surface of it, but hopefully given you a few ideas and a few things you can go away to think about. So hope things go well in your business, hope things pick up if they haven't already. And as I say, if you do want anything, then do come back to us, and I'll go through all the chat questions and come back to you by email shortly, probably be today or tomorrow morning, if that's okay. If you desperately want to get in touch with me, then give us an email or ring the office, and I'll have a chat with you and see where you can go. So thanks for that, and hopefully see you at the next session, which will be in April. Cheers now.